London, 1848. The bells of St. George's Church rang faintly in the distance as Miss Josephine Pembroke stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror, counting the flaws that had earned her the title of unmarriageable after 4 unsuccessful seasons. At 26, she was firmly on the shelf, a fact that London society never failed to whisper about behind gloved hands and painted fans. "Almost ready, miss?" her lady's maid asked, pinning the last rebellious dark curl into submission. "As ready as I'll ever be for another night of polite rejection," Josephine replied, her green eyes studying the modest emerald pendant at her throat, her mother's, and one of the few pieces of jewelry the Pembrokes had managed to keep when their fortunes had turned. The maid's hands stilled. "Miss Pembroke, if I may be so bold, you speak as though the evening is already lost." "Experience is an excellent teacher, Martha." Josephine stood, smoothing the dark green silk of her gown. It was 3 seasons old, carefully altered to suggest a newer fashion, though any discerning eye would note its age. "And I have been an attentive pupil." Josephine had learned her lessons well. That beauty without fortune was merely decoration. That intelligence in a woman was tolerated only when accompanied by substantial dowry. That her father's gambling debts had not only emptied their coffers, but tainted the Pembroke name with whispers of impropriety. Most importantly, she had learned that dreams of a love match were the foolish indulgences of girls who had never faced the cutting edge of society's judgment. As she descended the stairs of their modest townhouse in an unfashionable corner of Mayfair, her younger sister Catherine bounded toward her with an exuberance that Josephine both envied and sought to protect. "Oh, Jo, you look beautiful," Catherine exclaimed, her 19-year-old face alight with the enthusiasm of a debutante who still believed in fairy tales. Their mother appeared from the drawing room, her once beautiful face lined with worry beneath careful cosmetics. "Catherine, contain yourself. A lady never runs and certainly never shouts." Lady Pembroke's gaze swept over her elder daughter critically. "Josephine, that gown again. I had hoped you might have allowed Mrs. Wilson to make some more substantial alterations." "Any more alterations, and it would be an entirely different gown," Josephine replied. "Besides, no amount of lace or ribbon will disguise what everyone knows, that I am the daughter of a man who lost his fortune at the gaming tables and left his family to bear the shame." "Josephine," her mother said sharply, glancing nervously at Catherine, "your father made mistakes, but we do not speak ill of the dead." "My apologies, mother," Josephine's voice softened. "I merely state facts that all of London whispers. Pretending otherwise has not served us well these past seasons." Lady Pembroke sighed. "It is Catherine's first season. We must focus on her prospects now." The words strung, though Josephine had expected them. Her role had shifted from marriageable daughter to chaperone, a transition that happened to many women, though usually after they became spinster aunts, not while still theoretically in their prime. "Of course," Josephine said with practiced equanimity, "I shall be the very model of propriety and discretion." "And perhaps," her mother added with forced brightness, "Lady Harrington might introduce you to her cousin, the widower with the estate in Somerset. He has 3 young children, in need of a motherly presence." Josephine bit back her retort. A widower with children and a remote estate was precisely the kind of match her mother now deemed suitable, a man who would value practicality over passion, competence over beauty. The role of convenient wife, stepmother, and household manager was the best a woman in her position could hope for. "I shall keep an open mind," she promised, though her heart rebelled at the thought. The Harrington ball was precisely as Josephine had imagined, a glittering display of wealth, beauty, and social hierarchy. Crystal chandeliers cast their warm glow over silks and satins, jewels, and polished boots. Music from the orchestra floated through the air, providing rhythm for the intricate dance of social politics below. Catherine was quickly swept into a set of quadrilles, her face flushed with pleasure as young men flocked to her side. Josephine found herself where she had been for 4 seasons, along the wall with the chaperones, the too young, and the firmly unmarriageable. Miss Pembroke, Lady Harrington approached, her silk gown rustling impressively. How delightful to see you again. My cousin Mr. Fenwick was asking after you. He remembers you fondly from the Millbrook dinner last autumn. Josephine smiled politely. How kind of him to remember me. He is recently widowed, as you may recall. Such a tragedy, leaving those dear children motherless. He mentioned he would be pleased to stand up with you later this evening. I would be honored, Josephine replied automatically, even as her heart sank. Mr. Fenwick was at least 50, with thinning hair and a paunch that spoke of too many rich meals. He had barely spoken 3 words to her at the Millbrook dinner, but now that he needed a mother for his children, apparently her shelf status made her a suitable candidate. As Lady Harrington moved away, Josephine caught fragments of conversation from a nearby cluster of young ladies. 4th season, can you imagine? Father left them nearly destitute. Does she truly expect to make a match now? Josephine stiffened, fixing her gaze on the dancers, pretending not to hear. This was the truth she had accepted. In the marriage market, she was damaged goods, a cautionary tale, a woman whose value had been calculated and found wanting. She slipped away from the ballroom, seeking a moment's peace in Lady Harrington's famous conservatory. The humid air, heavy with the scent of exotic blooms, provided instant relief from the stifling judgment of the ballroom. Wandering between tall palms and flowering vines, Josephine finally allowed her serene mask to drop, revealing the fatigue and resignation beneath. I believe hiding constitutes a strategic retreat, not a surrender, a deep voice remarked from the shadows, causing Josephine to startle. A tall figure stepped into the light. The Duke of Blackmore, Alexander Brentwood, stood before her, his dark evening clothes contrasting sharply with the vibrant greenery surrounding them. His reputation preceded him. Widowed young, immensely wealthy, notoriously selective in his associations, and a favorite target of matchmaking mamas despite his apparent disinterest in remarrying. Your Grace, Josephine curtsied, mortified to be caught in her moment of weakness by one of society's most formidable members. I was admiring Lady Harrington's orchids. With your back to them? He inquired, one dark eyebrow arched in skeptical amusement. Heat flooded Josephine's cheeks. I was momentarily distracted by my thoughts. Thoughts of escape, perhaps. His eyes, a startling blue that reminded her of a winter sky, studied her with unsettling intensity. I find myself harboring similar inclinations whenever I'm forced to attend these affairs. Josephine wasn't certain how to respond to such frankness from a duke. I imagine your experience of these events differs somewhat from mine, Your Grace. In that I am pursued rather than overlooked. He moved to stand beside her, examining a delicate white orchid. Different forms of unwanted attention, Miss Pembroke, but unwanted nonetheless. Her surprise must have shown on her face, for he added, we were introduced 2 seasons ago at Lady Wetherby's musicale. You played Beethoven with remarkable skill and no apparent desire for applause. You remember that? She couldn't hide her astonishment. That evening had been unremarkable. She had performed adequately, received polite applause, and faded back into obscurity. I remember people who don't perform for society's approval, he said simply, a rare quality in these circles. Before she could formulate a response, voices approached the conservatory entrance. The Duke moved with surprising swiftness, guiding her behind a large palm. Unless you wish to explain why you're alone with me in the conservatory, he murmured close to her ear. Josephine's heart raced at their sudden proximity, not from fear of discovery, but from the unexpected intimacy. His hand rested lightly at her elbow, and she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood and something uniquely masculine. 2 young ladies entered, giggling conspiratorially. Mama will be looking for me, one whispered. But I had to show you. Look, he sent a note. Lord Pemberton, oh Sarah, how thrilling. They huddled over a small piece of paper, their excitement palpable even from Josephine's hidden vantage point. "He wishes to meet me in the library at midnight," the first girl continued. "He says he cannot bear another moment without declaring himself." "But Sarah, your reputation—" "Nonsense, he's an honorable man. Besides, a stolen kiss before an engagement is hardly scandalous." The second girl giggled again. "You're positively wicked. Come, we must return before you're missed." As quickly as they had entered, they departed, leaving Josephine and the Duke in silence. His hand dropped from her elbow, but he remained close. "Miss Sarah Chilton," he said quietly, "is 17 and possesses a dowry of £50,000. Lord Pemberton is 38 and has gambling debts that exceed his annual income." Josephine stepped away from the concealing palm. "You seem remarkably well informed about their circumstances." "Information is power, Miss Pembroke. The girl is being manipulated by a man who sees her as a solution to his financial problems, not as a woman to cherish." His expression darkened. "Her parents are neglectful, her companion is easily bribed, and Pemberton is desperate." "She'll be ruined," Josephine said softly, understanding the implications immediately. "Or trapped in a marriage to a man who values only her fortune." "Indeed," he studied her face. "What would you do, Miss Pembroke, if you had this information?" The question seemed to test her in some way she didn't fully comprehend. "I would find Lady Chilton immediately," she answered without hesitation. "A mother informed of such a plot would surely intervene, no matter how neglectful she might otherwise be." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "A direct approach, not what I expected." "Did you expect me to suggest gossip or intrigue, Your Grace?" Josephine felt a spark of indignation. "Or perhaps you thought I would advocate doing nothing, as it doesn't concern me." "I expected nothing, Miss Pembroke. I merely asked what you would do." He offered his arm. "Shall we return to the ballroom? I believe I promised Lady Harrington I would dance at least once this evening. Would you do me the honor?" Josephine hesitated. Dancing with the Duke of Blackmore would draw every eye in the room. "Your Grace, I'm not certain that would be wise. People will talk." "People always talk, Miss Pembroke. The question is whether we grant them the power to dictate our actions." His arm remained extended, an invitation and a challenge. Against her better judgment, Josephine placed her hand on his sleeve. "I hope you don't come to regret this act of gallantry." His smile was brief but genuine. "I assure you, gallantry has nothing to do with it." As they re-entered the ballroom, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations paused, heads turned, and fans fluttered with increased vigor. Josephine forced herself to stand tall under the weight of so many stares, though her instinct was to shrink away from the attention. The Duke led her directly to the dance floor, where a waltz was just beginning. As he placed his hand at her waist, he leaned slightly closer. "Lady Chilton is by the punch table. Perhaps you might find yourself requiring refreshment after our dance." Josephine looked up at him in surprise. He had taken her suggestions seriously. "Thank you," she said quietly as they began to move with the music. "For the dance?" There was that raised eyebrow again. "For caring what happens to a foolish young girl." The Duke guided her through a turn, his movements precise and elegant. "I find that indifference to others' suffering is the true mark of poor breeding, regardless of one's title or fortune." It was a remarkable statement from a man of his position, and Josephine found herself reassessing her assumptions about him. "Is that why you remember a mediocre pianist from a forgettable musicale 2 seasons ago?" "You underestimate both your performance and my memory, Miss Pembroke." His hand was warm and steady at her waist. "You played with feeling in a room where most display only technique. I appreciate authenticity where I find it." The dance ended too quickly, and as promised, Josephine made her way to the punch table where Lady Chilton stood observing the dancers with a critical eye. "Lady Chilton," Josephine curtsied, How lovely to see you again." The older woman's gaze was cool and assessing. "Miss Pembroke, I see you've captured the Duke's attention this evening. Quite a coup for someone in your situation." Josephine swallowed her pride. His Grace was merely being kind. "Lady Chiltern, I hope you'll forgive my forwardness, but I feel compelled to share something I overheard regarding Miss Sarah." The woman's expression sharpened. "What about my daughter?" Lowering her voice, Josephine relayed what she had heard, careful to present it as concerned observation rather than idle gossip. "I would have kept silent if it were merely a flirtation, but I fear Lord Pemberton's intentions may not be honourable." Lady Chiltern's face paled, then flushed with anger. "That fortune-hunting scoundrel. Thank you, Miss Pembroke. You'll excuse me." She swept away with purpose, and Josephine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Across the room, the Duke caught her eye and inclined his head slightly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Mr. Fenwick did indeed claim his dance, during which he spoke at length about his children's need for a feminine influence and the practicalities of managing his household. Josephine made appropriate responses while watching Lady Chiltern extract her daughter from the ballroom with uncharacteristic attentiveness. As the evening drew to a close, Josephine found Catherine to prepare for their departure. Her sister's eyes were bright with excitement. "Oh, Joe, I've had the most wonderful time. I danced every set, and Lord Milfield said my eyes remind him of summer skies." Josephine smiled fondly. "I'm glad you enjoyed yourself, dearest. But remember, pretty compliments are the small change of society. Don't value them too highly." Catherine's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "You're always so practical, Joe. Can't you just be happy for me?" "I am happy for you," Josephine assured her, adjusting her sister's shawl. "I merely want you to protect your heart as carefully as you protect your reputation." "Speaking of reputations," Catherine whispered, "everyone is talking about you dancing with the Duke of Blackmore. Mrs. Fitzsimmons said he never dances with anyone below the rank of Earl's daughter, and certainly never with—" She stopped abruptly, colour flooding her cheeks. "With unmarriageable spinsters." Josephine finished for her, keeping her voice light despite the sting. "Well, perhaps His Grace was feeling charitable tonight." Catherine looked stricken. "I didn't mean—" "I know you didn't." Josephine squeezed her hand. "Come, Mother is waiting." As they departed, Josephine felt a distinct sensation of being watched. Glancing back, she found the Duke observing her from across the room, his expression unreadable. She nodded slightly in acknowledgement, then turned away, pushing aside the inexplicable flutter in her chest. It was foolish to read anything into one dance and a brief conversation. Men like Alexander Brentwood did not form attachments to women like Josephine Pembroke. That was simply how the world worked, and all her experience confirmed it. Yet as their carriage rattled homeward through London's darkened streets, Josephine found herself replaying their encounter, his words echoing in her mind. "I appreciate authenticity where I find it." For the first time in years, she allowed herself a moment, just a moment, to wonder if perhaps the rules that had governed her life might not be as immutable as she had believed. The morning after Lady Harrington's ball brought a flurry of callers to the Pembroke residence, an unusual occurrence that left Lady Pembroke simultaneously pleased and suspicious. 3 young men asking after Catherine already, she marvelled, reviewing the calling cards left in the silver tray. The Harrington ball has certainly put her in good stead. Josephine, seated at the writing desk composing correspondence, smiled at her sister's evident delight. Catherine made a charming impression. It's no wonder she's attracted attention. "And you, Josephine," her mother continued with careful nonchalance, "dancing with the Duke of Blackmore, most unexpected." "It was a single dance, Mother. Nothing more than a courtesy." Lady Pembroke raised her eyebrows. "A courtesy from a man who has systematically avoided extending such courtesies to daughters of far more prominent families. I think not." Before Josephine could respond, Martha appeared at the drawing-room door. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but there's a messenger from Blackmore House with a delivery for Miss Pembroke." The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine's eyes widened, Lady Pembroke's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise, and Josephine felt her heart stumble in its rhythm. "Show him in, Martha," Lady Pembroke said, recovering her composure with admirable speed. The messenger, dressed in the Blackmore livery, bowed formally. "Miss Josephine Pembroke." "His Grace the Duke of Blackmore presents his compliments and asks that you accept this token of his esteem." He presented a small package wrapped in blue silk and tied with silver ribbon, along with a sealed note. Josephine accepted both with hands she willed not to tremble. "Please convey my thanks to His Grace," she managed to say evenly. After the messenger departed, Catherine could contain herself no longer. "Open it, Joe. What could the Duke have sent you?" Even Lady Pembroke leaned forward in anticipation, her usual decorum momentarily forgotten. Josephine carefully untied the ribbon and unwrapped the silk to reveal a small book bound in soft leather. "Beethoven's Sonatas," she murmured, running her fingers over the embossed title. Opening the cover, she found a first edition, the pages crisp and pristine. "Read the note," Catherine urged, practically bouncing in her seat. Josephine broke the seal and unfolded the paper, conscious of her family's eager scrutiny. "Miss Pembroke," she read aloud, "I recall your masterful interpretation of the Moonlight Sonata and thought you might appreciate this edition. I find music speaks most eloquently when its performer understands both its technical demands and its emotional depths. A rare combination you possess. I would be honored if you would play for me again sometime, perhaps at the musical evening Lady Wexford hosts next week. With respect and admiration, Blackmore." Catherine clasped her hands in delight. A personal invitation from the Duke. And such a thoughtful gift. He remembered your playing from 2 years ago. Lady Pembroke's expression was a complex mixture of hope and skepticism. "It is certainly unusual. The Duke is not known for his impulsive gestures." "It's merely a courtesy," Josephine insisted, though the care evident in both the gift and the note suggested otherwise. "His Grace appreciates music, that's all." "Josephine," her mother's voice held a note of gentle reproof. "While I admire your practicality, there are times when you might allow yourself to consider more optimistic interpretations." "What would you have me think, Mother? That the Duke of Blackmore, one of England's most eligible widowers, has developed a tender for a woman of no fortune and fading prospects after a single dance and brief conversation?" Josephine carefully wrapped the book again, her fingers lingering on the soft leather. "Such thinking leads only to disappointment." "Perhaps," Lady Pembroke conceded, "but it seems the Duke has singled you out for his attention, whatever his reasons. It would be foolish not to acknowledge the possibility that his interest might be genuine." "And it would be equally foolish to build castles in the air," Josephine countered, tucking the note into the book. "I shall thank him appropriately when next we meet and think no more of it." But that evening, alone in her bedroom, Josephine removed the book from its wrapping once more. She played each sonata in her mind as she turned the pages, her fingers moving silently above the sheets as though touching piano keys. When she reached the Moonlight Sonata, she paused, remembering how she had poured her heart into the performance, believing no one was truly listening, playing for herself alone during that long-ago musicale. He had been listening. More than that, he had understood what she expressed through the music, something raw and honest that she rarely revealed in society. "Authenticity," she whispered, recalling his words. The Duke valued what was real, what was true. In a world of artifice and careful pretense, that preference was as rare as it was dangerous. Josephine placed the book on her bedside table and extinguished her lamp, but sleep eluded her as she contemplated the possibility that, for reasons she couldn't fathom, she had somehow caught the attention of a man who could destroy what remained of her reputation with a word. or elevate her beyond her wildest dreams. Either prospect was terrifying. Lady Wexford's musical evening arrived with alarming swiftness. Josephine had spent the intervening days in a state of uncharacteristic indecision, alternating between anticipation and dread. She had practiced the Beethoven sonatas until her fingers ached, then convinced herself the Duke's invitation had been merely a polite gesture he had already forgotten. "You look lovely," Catherine assured her as they prepared to depart. "That blue brings out your eyes, and Mrs. Wilson's alterations make it appear quite new." Josephine smoothed the midnight blue silk of her gown, her one concession to vanity, as the color had always been her best. "It's still a 3-year-old gown with clever alterations, Cathy, but thank you for the kind fiction." "It's not fiction," Catherine protested. "You are beautiful, Jo, everyone says so." "Beauty without fortune is merely decoration," Josephine replied, repeating the lesson society had taught her so thoroughly. "But tonight isn't about me. Lady Wexford's musicales are always exceptional, and we shall enjoy ourselves regardless of who does or doesn't acknowledge our presence." Catherine's expression turned mischievous. "Even if a certain Duke fails to appear." "Especially then," Josephine said firmly. But despite her determination to remain indifferent, Josephine's heart leaped traitorously when she entered Lady Wexford's music room and immediately spotted the Duke of Blackmore engaged in conversation with their hostess. He looked up as they were announced, his gaze finding hers with unerring precision, and the intensity of that brief connection sent a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the crowded room. Lady Wexford, a plump, cheerful widow with a genuine passion for music, approached them with evident pleasure. "Lady Pembroke, Miss Catherine, how delightful. We have such a treat this evening. Signor Belmont will perform selections from Verdi, and I have persuaded several of our guests to favor us with their accomplishments as well." She turned to Josephine with a conspiratorial smile. "The Duke of Blackmore specifically mentioned your skill with Beethoven, my dear. Might we persuade you to play for us later?" Josephine felt her mother and sister's attention sharpen. "I would be honored, Lady Wexford, though I fear His Grace may have overstated my modest abilities." "Nonsense. The Duke is not given to exaggeration or flattery. If he says you play well, then I have no doubt you do." Lady Wexford patted her hand. "Let us say after Signor Belmont's first set, excellent." As their hostess moved away to greet new arrivals, Lady Pembroke regarded her elder daughter with renewed speculation. "It seems the Duke has been singing your praises, Josephine." "He heard me play once, Mother. That is hardly grounds for the expression you're wearing." Josephine strove for a tone of calm dismissal. "Now, shall we find our seats before all the best ones are taken?" They settled into the third row of chairs, arranged before the grand pianoforte. The room filled quickly with members of society's upper echelons, their jewels catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. Josephine was acutely conscious of the Duke's presence near the front, though she kept her gaze deliberately directed elsewhere. Signor Belmont's performance was magnificent, his rich tenor filling the room with the passionate strains of Verdi. Josephine lost herself in the music, allowing it to wash over her, until Lady Wexford's voice broke the spell as she announced the next performer. "And now, we have the pleasure of hearing Miss Josephine Pembroke play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata." The polite applause that greeted this announcement held a note of curiosity. Josephine rose gracefully, making her way to the pianoforte with outward composure that belied her racing pulse. As she took her seat and adjusted her skirts, she allowed herself one glance toward the Duke. He was watching her with that same intensity she had noted at the ball, his expression focused and expectant. There was no polite boredom, no distracted tolerance, only genuine interest. It was disconcerting and exhilarating in equal measure. Josephine placed her hands over the keys and closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Then she began to play. The opening notes of the Moonlight Sonata emerged soft and hesitant, like questions whispered in darkness. Josephine surrendered to the music, as she always did when playing for herself alone, forgetting the audience, forgetting her practiced social mask, allowing the melancholy beauty of the piece to flow through her fingers, unfiltered by fear or pretense. The first movement spoke of longing, restrained yet persistent, like waves upon a shore. The second brought brief moments of lightness, of hope, before the third erupted in passionate intensity that Josephine rarely revealed in her daily life. Her fingers flew across the keys, drawing forth sounds of storm and struggle, of despair and determination. When the final notes faded, Josephine remained motionless for a moment, returning gradually to awareness of her surroundings. The silence that followed was profound, then broken by applause that seemed more enthusiastic than the polite acknowledgement usually accorded an amateur performer. She rose and curtsied, her gaze involuntarily seeking the Duke again. He was not applauding. Instead, he watched her with an expression that made her breath catch, recognition, admiration, and something more complex that she couldn't name, but that caused heat to rise in her cheeks. Lady Wexford approached, beaming. "My dear, that was extraordinary. Such feeling. You must play for us again before the evening ends." Murmurs of agreement rose from those nearby, and Josephine accepted their compliments with gracious modesty, though she felt strangely exposed, as though her performance had revealed more of her true self than she had intended. As she made her way back to her seat, the Duke intercepted her. "Miss Pembroke," he said, his voice pitched low for her ears alone, "you played exactly as I remembered, with honesty that makes technical perfection secondary." "Thank you, Your Grace." She met his gaze directly. "And thank you for the book. It was a most thoughtful gift. One that will be properly appreciated, I think." His blue eyes studied her. "Would you walk with me a moment? Lady Wexford's conservatory is almost as impressive as Lady Harrington's, and considerably less populated at present." Josephine hesitated, glancing toward her mother and sister. "I'm not certain that would be wise." "A brief conversation in full view of the open doors," he clarified, gesturing to where the conservatory opened off the music room. "I assure you, your reputation will remain intact." Something in his tone, a hint of dry amusement, made her relent. "Very well, Your Grace." A brief conversation. They strolled toward the conservatory, observed by curious eyes that Josephine forced herself to ignore. The humid air embraced them as they entered, the scent of exotic blooms providing a heady counterpoint to the distant strains of music from the next room. "You seem to have a fondness for retreating to conservatories, Miss Pembroke," the Duke observed, his hands clasped behind his back as they walked between potted palms and flowering orchids. "They offer brief sanctuary from society's more exhausting aspects," she admitted, "though I confess I'm puzzled why you would seek such sanctuary. The Duke of Blackmore surely has no need to hide from unwelcome attention or judgment." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You have a curious notion of a duke's existence if you believe it free from unwelcome attention or judgment. The form may differ, but the substance remains." "I find that difficult to credit, Your Grace. The world arranges itself to suit your convenience, not the reverse." "The world arranges itself according to expectations," he corrected. "Those expectations can become a cage, regardless of its gilding." He paused beside a particularly magnificent orchid, its petals a deep crimson against glossy leaves. "But we digress. I wish to speak with you about a matter of some delicacy." Josephine's pulse quickened. "Oh, I understand your family's circumstances are constrained since your father's passing." His tone was matter-of-fact, not pitying, but Josephine stiffened nonetheless. "Our circumstances are manageable, Your Grace. We are not objects of charity." "I never suggested you were." He regarded her steadily. "I merely wished to propose a potential solution that might be mutually beneficial." A cold weight settled in Josephine's stomach. This, then, was the purpose of his attention, some arrangement that would benefit them both. Not an unexpected development, but disappointing in ways she refused to examine too closely. "What kind of arrangement?" she asked carefully. "I have a ward, my late wife's younger sister, Lady Sophia Hargrove. She is 18 and in need of a companion for her first season. Someone with knowledge of society's workings, but perhaps a fresher perspective than the usual dowager or paid companion." He studied her reaction. "I thought you might consider the position." Josephine blinked in surprise. Of all the proposals she had briefly imagined, this had not been among them. "You wish me to be Lady Sophia's companion? But surely there are women of higher rank who would." "I don't want a woman of high rank," he interrupted. "I want someone who understands the pitfalls of society but hasn't been corrupted by its values. Someone who sees people clearly, as you did with Miss Chiltern and Lord Pemberton." "You planned this," Josephine realized. "That night in the conservatory, you were testing me." He inclined his head slightly. "I observed you." "There's a difference." "To what end? Why this interest in me, Your Grace? I am hardly a person of consequence." "On the contrary, Miss Pembroke, you possess qualities I value highly. Discernment, honesty, and compassion without sentimentality." His expression softened. "And Sophia needs precisely those qualities in a guide. She is intelligent but sheltered, and I would not see her heart broken or her spirit crushed by the same society that has been so carelessly cruel to you." The assessment was so accurate and so bluntly stated that Josephine found herself momentarily speechless. When she recovered, indignation flared. "So you offer me employment as an act of charity disguised as admiration?" She straightened her shoulders. "I appreciate your concern for both Lady Sophia and myself, Your Grace, but I must decline." "It is not charity," he said firmly. "The position comes with a substantial stipend, private apartments at Blackmore House, and the use of my carriages and servants. You would be treated as a member of my household, not as an employee." "A gilded cage, as you mentioned earlier." Josephine shook her head. "I cannot accept." "May I ask why?" There was genuine puzzlement in his tone. "Your family's circumstances." "My family's circumstances do not entitle you or anyone else to purchase my compliance, regardless of how you frame the transaction." The words emerged with more heat than she had intended. "What you propose would place me in an ambiguous position, neither servant nor family, dependent on your goodwill, subject to your authority. I may have limited options, Your Grace, but I still have the right to choose among them." Rather than appearing offended by her vehemence, the Duke regarded her with increased interest. "You misunderstand me, Miss Pembroke. I don't wish to purchase your compliance. I respect your independence. Indeed, it is one of the qualities that brought you to my attention." "Then respect my decision," she said, more gently now. "I cannot accept a position that would separate me from my family and place me in your household without a clearly defined role. Society would assume the worst, and my reputation, tenuous as it is, would be irreparably damaged." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You believe I am proposing something improper?" "I believe that regardless of your intentions, the arrangement you describe would inevitably lead to speculation of impropriety." Josephine met his gaze steadily. "And while my prospects are limited, I have no wish to become an object of scandal." The Duke was silent for a moment, considering her words. "Your concern is valid," he finally acknowledged. "I failed to consider how such an arrangement might appear to others. Please accept my apology." His willingness to acknowledge his oversight surprised her almost as much as the original proposal. "There is no need for apology, Your Grace. Your concern for your ward is commendable. Nevertheless, I regret causing you discomfort." He glanced toward the music room, where Signor Belmont had begun his second set. "We should return before your absence prompts the very speculation you wish to avoid." As they walked back, Josephine felt a curious mixture of relief and disappointment. The Duke's proposal had been unexpected and inappropriate, yet his recognition of her objections suggested a respect for her judgment that few men of his station would demonstrate. "Your Grace," she said as they reached the doorway, "I hope you find a suitable companion for Lady Sophia. Perhaps a widowed gentlewoman of good family but reduced circumstances might be more appropriate." He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, though I doubt I will find anyone with your particular combination of qualities. I'm certain there are many women far more qualified than I." "There are many women with impeccable pedigrees and flawless manners," he agreed. "Few, however, would have intervened to protect a girl they didn't know from a fortune hunter, or would speak so honestly to a duke about the impropriety of his proposal." Before she could respond, he added, "Good evening, Miss Pembroke. You played beautifully." With a slight bow, he moved away, leaving Josephine to return to her seat beside her mother, who immediately leaned close to whisper, "What did his Grace want?" "You were gone for quite some time." "He wished to discuss a matter of business," Josephine replied quietly, "nothing of consequence." But as the evening continued, she found her attention repeatedly drawn to the Duke, who conversed easily with various guests while seeming entirely unaffected by their earlier exchange. His proposal had been presumptuous, his recognition of her objections surprisingly humble. Neither reaction aligned with the arrogant, remote aristocrat she had expected. Alexander Brentwood, she was beginning to suspect, was not a man easily categorized or dismissed. The realization was as unsettling as it was intriguing. The following weeks brought an unprecedented change to the Pembroke household. Catherine became the object of serious courtship by Lord Milfield, a handsome young viscount of good fortune and better character. His attentions elevated the family's social standing enough that invitations arrived with increasing frequency, and Lady Pembroke's spirits rose accordingly. "To think," she marveled one morning as they sorted through the day's correspondence, "that we might see Catherine established so advantageously. Lord Milfield's mother has been most welcoming, despite our circumstances." "Catherine has charm enough to overcome any deficiency in fortune," Josephine replied, genuinely pleased for her sister. "And Lord Milfield seems sincerely attached to her." "Indeed, indeed." Lady Pembroke hesitated, then added carefully, "And you, Josephine? The Duke of Blackmore continues to seek your company whenever we attend the same functions. Surely you must acknowledge his interest now." Since the night of Lady Wexford's musicale, the Duke had made no further mention of his proposal regarding Lady Sophia. Instead, he had engaged Josephine in conversation at every social event they both attended, solicited her opinion on books and music, and once, memorably, escorted her through an exhibition of Italian paintings at a private gallery, discussing each work with a knowledge that matched her own. "His Grace enjoys intelligent conversation," Josephine said, deflecting her mother's inquiry. "There is no deeper significance to his attention." "No significance?" Lady Pembroke's eyebrows rose. "My dear girl, when a duke, repeatedly singles out a particular woman for his attention, society draws certain conclusions." "Society is often wrong," Josephine countered, though she couldn't deny the whispers that followed her now were of a different nature than before. Where once she had been dismissed as unmarriageable, she was now the subject of speculation and, increasingly, envy. "Perhaps," her mother conceded, "but in this case, I believe there may be substance behind the gossip. The question is, what are your feelings toward the Duke?" Josephine set down the invitation she'd been examining, considering how to answer truthfully without revealing the confusion of her own heart. "I find him unexpected. He is not what I first assumed." "That is hardly a declaration of affection," Lady Pembroke observed dryly. "No, it isn't," Josephine agreed. "Because I have no reason to believe the Duke's interest extends beyond friendship. He has made no declarations, offered no particular attentions beyond conversation. To imagine more, would be self-deception. Lady Pembroke studied her daughter with shrewd eyes. You guard your heart too carefully, Josephine. Sometimes one must risk disappointment to gain happiness. And sometimes, mother, one must accept reality to avoid unnecessary pain. Josephine rose. I have promised to help Mrs. Wilson with Catherine's new evening gown this afternoon. Will you excuse me? As she left the room, Josephine acknowledged privately that her mother had touched on a truth she was reluctant to face. She had indeed guarded her heart, not merely from the Duke, but from all possibility of attachment. Years of rejection had taught her to expect nothing, to find contentment in the absence of hope, rather than risk the pain of disappointment. But Alexander Brentwood had disrupted that careful equilibrium. Each conversation revealed new facets of his character, his dry wit, his unexpected compassion, his refreshing directness. He treated her not as a charity case or a curiosity, but as an equal whose opinions merited consideration. It was a dangerous path to walk. A duke might enjoy the company of a woman like Josephine Pembroke, might even admire certain qualities she possessed, but marriage was a different matter entirely. Dukes married for alliance, for fortune, for bloodlines, not for conversation, no matter how stimulating. Better to maintain the safe distance of friendship than nurture impossible dreams that could only end in heartbreak. Yet that resolve was tested severely when 3 days later a luxurious carriage bearing the Blackmore crest arrived at their doorstep. The footman presented a note addressed to Lady Pembroke, who read it with widening eyes. The Duke invites us to Blackmore House for tea this afternoon, she announced, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. All three of us, specifically mentioned. Catherine clapped her hands in delight. Blackmore House. I've heard it's magnificent, and a personal invitation from the Duke himself. Oh, Joe, this must mean something. It means he is being courteous to a family he has come to know socially, Josephine said firmly, though her heart had begun a treacherous rhythm. Nothing more. The invitation mentions that Lady Sophia Hargrove is eager to make our acquaintance, Lady Pembroke continued, scanning the note. How interesting. I had not realized the Duke's ward was in residence. Josephine felt a jolt of understanding. This, then, was his new strategy, to introduce his ward to her family, making any future arrangement more proper. It was cleverly done, and she found herself reluctantly admiring his adaptability. We shall accept, of course, Lady Pembroke decided, already mentally reviewing their wardrobes. Catherine, your new blue muslin will be perfect. Josephine, perhaps the sage green day dress. It brings out your eyes most becomingly. As you wish, mother. Josephine surrendered to the inevitable, knowing that refusing would only prompt questions she preferred not to answer. Blackmore House proved to be everything rumour had suggested. A magnificent mansion on Grosvenor Square, its classical facade speaking of wealth and taste in equal measure. They were admitted by a stately butler and led through an entrance hall adorned with marble columns and priceless art to a sun-filled drawing room where the Duke awaited them. He came forward immediately, the perfect host. Lady Pembroke, Miss Catherine, thank you for honouring us with your company. Beside him stood a young woman who could only be Lady Sophia, slender, fair-haired, with a sweet expression that brightened as introductions were made. I'm so pleased to meet you at last, she said with genuine warmth. My brother has spoken of you often, especially you, Miss Pembroke. He says you play Beethoven divinely. Josephine felt her cheeks warm under the Duke's steady gaze. His grace is too kind. My skill is modest at best. I assure you, my brother is never too kind, Lady Sophia said with a mischievous glance at him. Quite the opposite, in fact. He is dreadfully critical of most performances. Only when they lack soul, Sophia, he replied mildly. Technical proficiency without emotion is merely mechanical exercise. They settled into comfortable chairs as tea was served. The conversation flowed easily, with Lady Sophia proving a charming hostess despite her youth. She spoke enthusiastically of her upcoming debut, her hopes for the season, her love of music and art. "I confess I'm terribly nervous about my first ball," she admitted. "Everyone says the Ton can be so critical of newcomers, and I've spent so much of my life in the country that I fear I'll commit some terrible faux pas." "The Ton loves novelty," Catherine assured her. "And you're so lovely that you'll be an immediate success." "You're kind to say so," Lady Sophia replied, "but I'm well aware that beauty alone doesn't ensure a successful season. I need guidance from someone who understands society's intricacies, but won't." She hesitated. "Won't what, my dear?" Lady Pembroke prompted gently. "Won't try to change me into someone else entirely," Lady Sophia finished. "My brother has interviewed several potential companions, but none of them seem quite right. They're either too rigid in their adherence to propriety or too focused on making an advantageous match at any cost." Josephine felt the Duke's attention shift to her, though she kept her gaze deliberately fixed on his ward. "The right balance is difficult to achieve," she acknowledged, "but I'm certain His Grace will find someone suitable." "Actually," Lady Sophia said brightly, "I was hoping you might consider the position, Miss Pembroke. Alexander speaks so highly of your judgment and character." Despite her suspicion that this had been the purpose all along, Josephine was startled by the direct approach. That is very flattering, Lady Sophia, but I'm not certain I would be appropriate. I have my family responsibilities to consider." "Oh, but you wouldn't need to live here," Lady Sophia clarified quickly. "Alexander explained that wouldn't be suitable. I thought perhaps you might accompany me to my events, help me navigate social situations, advise me on propriety without stifling my personality completely." She glanced at her brother. "The arrangement would include a generous stipend, of course." The Duke spoke for the first time since the subject had been raised. "My sister can be remarkably direct, Miss Pembroke. I had intended to approach the matter with more diplomacy." "Direct is often preferable to diplomatic, Your Grace," Josephine replied, meeting his gaze at last. "Though I find myself wondering if this suggestion originated with Lady Sophia or with you." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "The idea was mine. The enthusiasm is entirely Sophia's." "It's true," Lady Sophia confirmed earnestly. "When Alexander described you, I knew immediately that you were precisely the guide I need. Someone who understands society's rules but sees beyond them to what truly matters." Josephine glanced at her mother, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed excitement. "It's an unexpected proposal," she said carefully. "I would need to consider it carefully." "Of course," the Duke agreed. "There is no need for an immediate decision." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Josephine remained acutely aware of the currents beneath the surface. The Duke had found a more acceptable approach to his original proposal, one that preserved proprieties while still achieving his aim of securing her guidance for his ward. It was cleverly done, and she found herself both impressed by his adaptability and wary of his persistence. As they prepared to leave, Lady Sophia impulsively took Josephine's hands in hers. "Please say you'll consider it, Miss Pembroke. I feel we could become great friends, and I truly need someone like you to help me through this season." The girl's sincerity was difficult to resist. "I promise to give it serious thought, Lady Sophia." The Duke himself escorted them to their carriage. As he handed Josephine in, he said quietly, "I hope you'll forgive the ambush. Sophia can be quite determined once she sets her mind to something." "A family trait, it seems," Josephine observed with a pointed look. His blue eyes gleamed with amusement. "Perhaps, though in this case, I believe her enthusiasm is genuine. She has few female companions near her own age, and your reputation for sense and sensibility appeals to her." "My reputation?" Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. "I wasn't aware I had one beyond unmarriageable spinster." "You underestimate yourself, Miss Pembroke." His voice was warm. "There are those who see beyond society's narrow judgments." Before she could respond, he stepped back, closing the carriage door with a bow. As they pulled away, Josephine found herself replaying his words, wondering at their meaning and at the unfamiliar sensation of being valued for qualities society had never found noteworthy. "Well," Lady Pembroke said once they were underway, "that was most illuminating." "Lady Sophia is delightful," Catherine enthused. "So natural and unaffected. And did you see how her brother watches you, Joe? He hardly took his eyes from you the entire time. He was evaluating my suitability as a companion for his ward," Josephine corrected, though she had indeed felt the weight of his attention throughout their visit. "Nonsense," her mother declared with unusual firmness. "A duke does not personally intervene to secure a companion for a ward, no matter how beloved. He employs people for such tasks. No, Josephine, His Grace has singled you out for reasons that have little to do with Lady Sophia's social education." "What reason could he possibly have?" Josephine demanded, frustrated by her mother's persistence. "Why would a man of his station, his wealth, his position, take any particular interest in me?" "Perhaps," Lady Pembroke suggested gently, "for the same qualities that made him notice your playing 2 years ago, qualities that have nothing to do with fortune or station and everything to do with character." The words echoed the Duke's own so closely that Josephine felt a sudden, dangerous flutter of hope, quickly suppressed. "Even if that were true, Mother, it changes nothing. A duke may admire certain qualities in a woman like me, but admiration does not translate to the kind of interest you're implying." "We shall see," was all Lady Pembroke would say, her expression thoughtful as she gazed out the carriage window. That night, Josephine lay awake long after the household had quieted, weighing her options with the pragmatism that had become her shield against disappointment. The position as Lady Sophia's companion offered both advantages and risks. The stipend would ease their financial strain considerably. The arrangement would not require her to live at Blackmore House, preserving her reputation. Lady Sophia herself seemed genuinely eager for her guidance. Yet closer association with the Duke presented dangers of a different sort. Already, his attention had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. Each conversation, each shared glance, each moment of unexpected understanding chipped away at the protective walls she had built around her heart. "This is madness," she whispered into the darkness of her bedroom. "He is a duke. I am no one. There is no future in such dreams." But as she finally drifted towards sleep, Josephine found herself remembering not his title or his wealth, but the warmth in his voice when he had said, "You underestimate yourself, Miss Pembroke." And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if perhaps she had. The decision, when it came, was prompted by an unexpected development. Lord Milfield formally requested Catherine's hand in marriage, his proposal accompanied by generous settlement terms that his solicitors presented to Lady Pembroke. "He is everything one could wish for in a son-in-law," Lady Pembroke said happily as she reviewed the documents. "Kind, honourable, and clearly devoted to our Catherine." "And the settlement is most generous," Josephine observed, noting the provisions for her sister's independent income and jointure. "Catherine will be secure, whatever the future brings." "Indeed," Lady Pembroke hesitated, then added more soberly, "which brings us to a matter of some delicacy, my dear. With Catherine established, our own circumstances will change." Josephine looked up sharply. "Change how, exactly?" "Lord Milfield has invited me to live with them after the marriage," her mother explained. "His estate has a charming dower house that would provide me with independence while remaining close to Catherine, especially when children come along." "I see." Josephine kept her voice carefully neutral, though her mind raced ahead. "And what of me?" Lady Pembroke reached across the table to take her hand. "You would be welcome as well, of course. Lord Milfield made that clear. But Josephine," she paused, choosing her words with care, "I wonder if this might be the moment to consider other possibilities." Such as becoming Lady Sophia's companion, Josephine supplied, understanding dawning. It would provide you with income, purpose, and a degree of independence that might be difficult to achieve in Catherine's household, her mother pointed out. And it would place you in proximity to the Duke, a man who clearly values your company, whatever his ultimate intentions. Josephine withdrew her hand gently. You make it sound so practical. I am attempting to approach the matter as you would, Lady Pembroke replied with a small smile. With clear-eyed assessment rather than sentiment. Despite herself, Josephine laughed. Hoist by my own petard, it seems. She sobered quickly. But you're right, mother. Catherine deserves to begin her married life without her spinster sister in attendance. And the position with Lady Sophia does offer advantages I would be foolish to dismiss. Then you'll accept. I will, Josephine decided, but with conditions that preserve my independence and reputation. I'll not become a dependent of Blackmore House, regardless of how generous the arrangements might be. Lady Pembroke's expression softened with understanding. My practical, proud daughter, you've borne so much with such grace. Perhaps it's time to allow some light into those carefully guarded places in your heart. Mother, Josephine protested, discomforted by the unexpected tenderness. I know, no sentimentality, Lady Pembroke rose. I'll leave you to compose your response to the Duke. Just remember, my dear, not all men are like your father. Some can be trusted with fragile things. After her mother left, Josephine sat for a long while, pen in hand, considering not just the wording of her acceptance, but the implications of the step she was about to take. Finally, she began to write, Your Grace. After careful consideration, I find myself able to accept the position as Lady Sophia's companion, subject to certain conditions that I believe will protect both her reputation and my own. She detailed her terms clearly. She would accompany Lady Sophia to social events and provide guidance, but would maintain her own lodgings. The arrangement would be formalized through proper contracts with specific duties outlined. And there would be no ambiguity about her role in Lady Sophia's life. As she sealed the letter, Josephine acknowledged that these practical concerns, while genuine, also served another purpose, to establish boundaries not just for society's sake, but for her own protection. For while she might have agreed to guide the Duke's ward through the treacherous waters of the Tun, she had no intention of navigating her own heart into equally dangerous territory. Some lessons, once learned, were not easily forgotten. And the lesson that love was not meant for women like Josephine Pembroke had been taught too thoroughly to be easily unlearned. Lady Sophia's debut ball at Blackmore House was the most anticipated event of the season. Invitations were coveted, acceptance assumed, and speculation about the Duke's ward ran rampant through London's drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs. For Josephine, the weeks leading up to the ball had been a whirlwind of activity. Her role as Lady Sophia's companion had quickly evolved into something more complex, part advisor, part confidant, part protector against the less savory aspects of society's attention. The Duke had accepted her conditions without argument, providing her with a generous stipend that allowed her to take modest but respectable rooms not far from Blackmore House. Their interactions remained cordial and correct, though Josephine was acutely aware of his presence whenever they were in the same room, and of his attention when she spoke with his sister. On the night of the ball, Josephine arrived early to help Lady Sophia prepare. The girl's excitement was palpable as her maid arranged her fair hair in an elegant style befitting a young lady's debut. Do you think everyone will come? Will they like me? Will I remember all the steps to the quadrille? What if I trip or say something foolish? The questions tumbled out in a nervous stream. Josephine smiled, adjusting a rebellious curl. Everyone who matters will come. Those who are kind will like you immediately, and those who aren't don't deserve your concern. You dance beautifully, and if you forget a step, simply smile and continue. As for saying something foolish, we all do occasionally. The trick is to laugh at yourself before others can. Lady Sophia captured her hand. How do you always know exactly what to say? You make everything seem manageable. Because it is, Josephine assured her. Remember, this is merely one night of many. Your worth isn't determined by how smoothly this ball proceeds or how many gentlemen seek your hand for a dance. Alexander says the same thing, Lady Sophia confided. He says the opinions that matter come from people who see beyond titles and fortunes to character. Your brother is a wise man, Josephine acknowledged, ignoring the now familiar flutter that accompanied any mention of the Duke. He also says you're the most sensible woman he's ever met, Lady Sophia added with a mischievous smile. He admires you tremendously, you know. Josephine busied herself with straightening Lady Sophia's necklace to hide her reaction. His Grace is kind to say so. Now I believe it's almost time. Are you ready to make your entrance? The ballroom of Blackmore House had been transformed into a wonderland of flowers, crystal, and candlelight. The cream of society filled the space, their jewels catching the light, their voices creating a melodic hum of anticipation. At the entrance, the Duke stood receiving guests, resplendent in formal evening attire, his aristocratic features composed in an expression of polite welcome that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Josephine took her place near the side of the room, where she could observe without drawing attention to herself. Her gown, a new creation in deep purple silk, was more elegant than anything she had worn in years, a necessary expense given her new position, though she had balked at the cost. "You look magnificent," a familiar voice said beside her, and she turned to find the Duke himself had approached, having temporarily delegated the greeting of guests to his steward. "Your Grace," she curtsied slightly. "Shouldn't you be receiving your guests?" "I've granted myself a brief respite to check on my sister's guardian angel." His eyes, warm with approval, took in her appearance. "The color suits you. It has the same rich depth as the Beethoven you play." The compliment, so specific and unexpected, caught her off guard. "Thank you. Lady Sophia is ready whenever you wish to make the introductions." "She's nervous but prepared." "As am I," he admitted, surprising her with his candor. "It's a significant responsibility, introducing her to society. I find myself uncharacteristically concerned about her reception." "She will charm them," Josephine assured him. "She has authenticity, as you would say, a quality rarer and more valuable than practiced manners or studied grace." The Duke's expression softened. "You've been good for her. She trusts your judgment implicitly." "The feeling is mutual. She's a remarkable young woman." "Thanks in no small part to your guidance these past weeks." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I'm grateful, Josephine, more than I can adequately express." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a tremor through her that she hoped wasn't visible. "I've done nothing extraordinary, Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected, "at least when we're not in formal company." Before she could respond, a footman approached to inform him that all expected guests had arrived. With a slight bow and a look that conveyed more than words, he left to fetch his sister for her formal introduction. The evening proceeded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. Lady Sophia made her entrance on her brother's arm, looking ethereal in pale blue silk, her fair beauty drawing appreciative murmurs from the assembled guests. The Duke presented her with evident pride, and the line of gentlemen eager to request a dance formed immediately. From her vantage point, Josephine watched with satisfaction as her charge navigated the complexities of her first ball with grace and genuine warmth. When Lady Sophia occasionally glanced her way, Josephine offered encouraging smiles or subtle nods of approval. "She does you credit," Lady Pembroke observed, joining her daughter. "Lady Sophia has none of the artifice one often sees in debutantes. The credit belongs to her natural character, mother, not to my brief influence." "Perhaps. But a diamond requires proper cutting to reveal its brilliance." Lady Pembroke studied her daughter's face. "You seem content, Josephine. This arrangement suits you." "It has its advantages," Josephine allowed. "The stipend is generous, the work interesting, and Lady Sophia a delightful companion." "And the Duke?" her mother inquired with careful nonchalance. "How do you find your association with him?" Josephine chose her words with equal care. "Cordial, professional. His Grace is not what I initially assumed." Lady Pembroke's eyes gleamed with understanding. "High praise indeed, from my daughter who assumes the worst of most men." "Experience has been an effective teacher," Josephine reminded her. "And yet, perhaps it's time for new lessons." Her mother nodded toward the dance floor, where the Duke was approaching with clear purpose. "I believe His Grace intends to claim a dance." Indeed, he stopped before them with a formal bow. "Lady Pembroke, Miss Pembroke, I hope you're enjoying the evening." "Immensely, Your Grace," Lady Pembroke assured him. "Your hospitality is magnificent, and Lady Sophia is a credit to your family." "You're too kind." His gaze shifted to Josephine. "Miss Pembroke, would you honor me with this dance?" Though she had half expected the request, Josephine still felt unprepared for the reality of it. "Your guests will talk, Your Grace." "Let them," he said simply, extending his hand. With a sense of stepping off a precipice into unknown depths, Josephine placed her hand in his. As he led her to the dance floor, she was acutely conscious of the eyes following their progress, the whispers behind fans, the speculative glances. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and as his hand settled at her waist, Josephine found herself closer to Alexander Brentwood than propriety strictly allowed. She could detect the faint scent of sandalwood and something uniquely his, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that appeared when he smiled, could feel the strength in the hand that held hers. "You're thinking too much," he murmured as they began to move with the music. "One of us should," she replied, trying for lightness and achieving something closer to breathlessness. His smile was brief but genuine. "What thoughts occupy that formidable mind of yours, I wonder?" "That everyone is watching us," Josephine admitted. "That they're wondering why the Duke of Blackmore would choose to dance with a woman universally acknowledged as unmarriageable." "Are you truly so concerned with their opinion?" There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. "I have learned through painful experience that society's opinion has tangible consequences," she explained. "Especially for women, without fortune or powerful connections to shield them." He guided her through a turn, his movements graceful and assured. "And if I told you that I don't give a damn about society's opinion?" The crude language, so at odds with his usual precise speech, startled a laugh from her. "I would say that only a duke has the luxury of such indifference." "Fair," he acknowledged. "But consider this. Perhaps my position grants me not just the luxury of ignoring irrelevant opinions, but the clearer perspective to recognize what truly matters." "And what matters, in your estimation?" Josephine asked, curious despite her caution. His blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Integrity, intelligence, compassion without sentimentality, courage to speak truth regardless of consequence. Authenticity in a world of careful pretense." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning she was afraid to interpret too precisely. "Those are admirable qualities," she managed to say, "though not one society typically values in a woman." "Society is frequently wrong," he echoed her own words from weeks earlier, "as I believe you once observed." Before she could respond, the music ended, and he stepped back with a formal bow. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Pembroke." As he escorted her from the floor, Josephine was conscious of having passed some invisible threshold, a point from which retreat might no longer be possible. The realization should have terrified her, yet instead she felt strangely exhilarated, as though a door long assumed locked had suddenly been discovered ajar, revealing possibilities she had never permitted herself to consider. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of observation, brief conversations, and quiet guidance for Lady Sophia when needed. The Duke did not approach Josephine again, though she often felt his gaze from across the room. As the last guests departed and Lady Sophia retired, flushed with the success of her debut, Josephine prepared to take her leave as well. She had already collected her wrap and was awaiting her hired carriage when the Duke appeared at the entrance hall. "You're leaving?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "It's late, Your Grace. Lady Sophia is safely abed, and my duties are complete for the evening." "Alexander," he reminded her, "and I had hoped you might stay a moment. There's a matter I wish to discuss." The formal phrasing sent a chill through her. This, then, was to be the reckoning, the moment when he clarified that his attention was merely courtesy, that she had misinterpreted his words during their dance. "Of course," she said, bracing herself for disappointment. He led her to his study, a masculine space lined with books and dominated by a massive desk of polished oak. The fire had been banked for the night, casting a warm glow over the room. "Please sit," he invited, gesturing to one of the leather chairs before the hearth. Josephine complied, arranging her skirts with deliberate care to hide her nervousness. "I hope all was satisfactory with Lady Sophia's debut. She conducted herself beautifully." "She did," he agreed, taking the chair opposite hers. "But I didn't ask you to stay to discuss my sister." "I assumed as much." Josephine folded her hands in her lap, resolved to meet whatever came with dignity. "What is it you wish to discuss, Your Gr. Alexander?" He leaned forward, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I find myself in an unusual position, Josephine. For the first time in my life, I'm uncertain how to proceed with a matter of great importance." The formal language and grave tone sent her pulse racing with apprehension. "I'm not sure I understand." "Let me be clearer, then." He drew a deep breath. "When my wife died 5 years ago, I believed I would never again wish to marry. Caroline and I had a compatible union, not a love match, but a partnership of mutual respect and shared values. Her death left me with responsibilities, but also with a certainty that I had experienced all that marriage had to offer." Josephine listened, in growing confusion. This was not the conversation she had expected. "And then," he continued, "I attended a musicale at Lady Weatherby's house and heard a woman play Beethoven with such honesty and feeling that I found myself unable to look away. She was not dressed in the latest fashion. She was not surrounded by admirers. She simply played as though the music mattered more than those listening to it." Realization began to dawn, bringing with it a disbelief so profound that Josephine could scarcely breathe. "I inquired after her, of course," Alexander went on. "I learned that she was the daughter of a gentleman who had lost his fortune at the gaming tables, that she had been on the marriage mart for several seasons without success. That society had labeled her unmarriageable due to her age, her lack of fortune, and her unfashionable habit of speaking her mind." He smiled slightly at the last. "I found myself intrigued by this woman who had apparently failed to secure a husband despite possessing qualities I valued far more than beauty or dowry. I resolved to seek her acquaintance at the earliest opportunity, but circumstances, namely Sophia's education and my own duties, intervened." "Alexander," Josephine finally managed, her voice scarcely above a whisper, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he replied with deliberate precision, "that I have spent 2 years thinking about a woman who plays Beethoven with her soul. That when I finally encountered her again, I discovered she possessed not only musical talent, but wisdom, courage, and a kind of integrity I had thought extinct in society. That my admiration has grown with each conversation, each observation, each moment in her company." He rose from his chair and, to her utter astonishment, knelt before her. "I'm saying, Josephine Pembroke, that I find myself in love with you, deeply, irrevocably in love. And I am asking, with more humility than I have ever felt, if you might consider becoming my wife." Josephine stared at him, Unable to comprehend the reality of the Duke of Blackmore, Alexander, kneeling before her, offering the one thing she had convinced herself was impossible. "This can't be real," she whispered. "You're a duke, I'm—" "An extraordinary woman," he finished for her. "A woman of intelligence, compassion, and uncompromising honesty. A woman who sees people for who they truly are, not for their titles or fortunes. A woman I would be honored to call my wife and duchess." Tears filled her eyes, blurring his beloved face. "Society will say you've lost your mind, that you could have had any woman in England." "I don't want any woman in England," he said simply. "I want you, Josephine, only you." Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. The culmination of years of rejection and judgment, of believing herself unworthy of precisely this kind of love. Alexander took her trembling hands in his. "Because you play Beethoven as though the music is part of your soul. Because you intervene to protect a young girl you didn't know from a predatory fortune hunter. Because you refused a position that would have compromised your principles, even when accepting would have eased your financial concerns. Because you speak truth without cruelty and show kindness without weakness." His voice deepened with emotion. "Because when I'm with you, I don't need to be the Duke of Blackmore. I can simply be Alexander, a man who values intelligence over fashion, substance over style, and authenticity over artifice." Josephine felt something long frozen begin to thaw within her, the protective shell she had built around her heart cracking under the warmth of his words, his touch, his unwavering gaze. "I've spent years believing love was not meant for women like me," she admitted, her voice unsteady. "That I was destined to be alone, or at best, someone's practical choice for a convenient wife. And I spent years believing I would never again wish to marry," he countered. "We were both wrong, it seems." A laugh escaped her, watery but genuine. "Spectacularly wrong." "Josephine," he tightened his hold on her hands, "I haven't yet received an answer to my question." She looked into his eyes, those remarkable blue eyes that had seen her truly from the first, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Alexander." Joy transformed his face, erasing the careful control he typically maintained, revealing the man beneath the Duke in all his vulnerable humanity. He rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms with a swiftness that left her breathless. "May I?" he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Josephine closed the distance between them, pressing her mouth to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened into something that sent heat coursing through her veins. His arms tightened around her waist, pulling her closer, while one hand cradled the back of her head with exquisite tenderness. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since I found you hiding in Lady Harrington's conservatory." "I wasn't hiding," she protested automatically, then laughed at herself. "No, you're right, I was hiding. I've been hiding for years, not just from society's judgment, but from the possibility of hope, of happiness." "No more hiding," he said softly. "Not from me." "No more hiding," she agreed, marveling at the sensation of being held, being cherished, being seen. "Though I warn you, a lifetime of practical pessimism cannot be overcome in a single evening, no matter how magical." Alexander smiled, the expression transforming his aristocratic features into something far more approachable and dear. "I don't expect miracles, Josephine. Only the chance to spend our lives proving that some dreams are worth believing in, after all." As he lowered his lips to hers once more, Josephine surrendered to the knowledge that the impossible had happened. The unmarriageable spinster had found not just a husband, but a love so profound it defied every lesson experience had taught her. Society would talk, of course. There would be raised eyebrows and whispered comments and speculation about what arts she had employed to capture a duke. But as Alexander had said earlier, let them talk. Their opinions mattered far less than the truth she now held in her arms, that love could indeed transform what had once seemed an immutable fate. The wedding of the Duke of Blackmore to Miss Josephine Pembroke was the social event of the following spring. St. George's Church in Hanover Square was filled to capacity with the cream of society, all eager to witness the marriage that had set London's gossips aflutter for months. The bride, radiant in ivory silk, adorned with Blackmore family lace, walked down the aisle on the arm of her soon-to-be brother-in-law, Lord Milfield. Behind her came her sister Catherine, visibly expecting her first child, and Lady Sophia Hargrove, whose joy at gaining a sister had been unrestrained from the moment the engagement was announced. At the altar waited Alexander, his face alight with an emotion so transparent that even the most cynical observers were forced to acknowledge that this was, against all expectations, a love match of the highest order. As they spoke their vows, Josephine's voice was clear and steady, free from the doubt that had been her constant companion for so many years. When Alexander placed the ring on her finger, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, selected to match her eyes, his hands were as sure as his voice when he promised to love, cherish, and protect her all the days of their lives. "I present to you the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore," the vicar announced to the assembled guests, and as Alexander bent to kiss his bride, the church erupted in applause. Later, at the wedding breakfast held at Blackmore House, the couple circulated among their guests with the ease of genuine happiness. Lady Chiltern, whose daughter had been saved from scandal months earlier, approached Josephine with genuine warmth. "Your Grace," she said, the new title still strange to Josephine's ears, "I never properly thanked you for your intervention regarding Sarah. She is now happily betrothed to Lord Atherton's son, a match that would never have occurred had she been compromised by that fortune hunter." "I'm delighted to hear it," Josephine replied sincerely. "And please call me Josephine. We are old acquaintances after all." Lady Chiltern's expression softened. "I fear I was not always kind in our previous encounters. Your rise has caused many of us to reconsider our assumptions. Life has a way of confounding our expectations," Josephine observed with a smile as her husband appeared at her side. "Indeed it does," Alexander agreed, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity that still thrilled her. "My wife has taught me that the most valuable treasures are often overlooked by those too blinded by convention to recognize true worth." The words, spoken with such evident admiration, caused Lady Chiltern's eyebrows to rise in surprise. "You are a fortunate man, Your Grace." "The most fortunate," he confirmed, his gaze never leaving Josephine's face. "And I intend to spend a lifetime ensuring my wife never doubts it." As the celebration continued around them, Alexander drew Josephine into a quiet alcove for a moment of privacy. "Are you happy, Duchess?" he asked, his voice tender. "Deliriously," she assured him, reaching up to touch his beloved face, "though I still half expect to wake and find this all a dream." "Not a dream," he promised, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "A reality more precious than anything I could have imagined when I heard you play Beethoven that night at Lady Weatherby's. A reality made possible by a duke who saw beyond society's judgments," Josephine added, "who valued authenticity above artifice and courage above conformity. And by a woman brave enough to believe, at last, that she was worthy of love." Alexander's blue eyes held hers with the intensity that still made her heart race. "My remarkable, unmarriageable Duchess." Josephine laughed, the sound bright with joy. "Unmarriageable no more, it seems." "No more," he agreed, drawing her closer. "And never alone again." As his lips found hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of such moments, Josephine surrendered to the knowledge that her fate had indeed been changed forever, not by a duke's title or fortune, but by his ability to see her true worth when everyone else, including herself, had failed to recognize it. Some dreams, it seemed, were worth believing in after all.